We saw the big monsters, we heard the quippy lines, and now the dust is settling. And it's time to decide if what we've seen from BioWare right now is up to the expectations that we have of one of the most impressive and important studios of the last 20 years. If Anthem really is a game that can be joined in the canon of what BioWare has created. Including the E3 conference and the amazing cover story from Game Informer, there is a lot of information out there telling us what Anthem will be. And for me, I really don't think it's an experience that I was expecting, and a game that seemingly is going to make the same mistakes Andromeda did. So right off the bat, it's important to note that the people that make video games are incredible. They work incessantly hard. They destroy their lives to do it. And this in no way should be critical of the people making it. It's very hard to steer a ship of creative forces like this on a dime and make changes. It's even harder when you're involved with a company that is building games a certain type of way to realize that maybe it's not coming through and it's not as effective as one would think. This happened with Andromeda, and right away in the Game Informer article story, there is a quote from Mike Gamble, who is working on Anthem and who has worked on Andromeda in the past. He's explaining why Andromeda's failure will inform, he didn't use the word failure obviously, will inform the experience of Anthem. We've been talking about what Anthem is a lot. Anthem is cooperative, Anthem is shared, Anthem is social, Anthem is a private hub, our world. We focus on that set of pillars and execute on them, instead of going super wide and trying to do all the things. Social, shared, private hub, all of these words, these pillars, so to speak, don't really talk about the experiences that I've had in previous BioWare games, the ones that have been very effective. I think this issue that Mike Gamble is mentioning of trying to focus on these ancillary things is specifically why Andromeda did so poorly. So let's build our own pillars, shall we? I have my 4 pillars of what I believe, and I think others do too, this game and other BioWare games should stick with in order to accomplish an experience that will really resonate with people like me and you. I think most importantly, it's the lore. It is the world you are creating, the escapist world that took us to Ferelden, took us around the universe, took us around the Jade Empire. What is the lore of Anthem? Next, it's the narrative experience. How, as we as the players are interacting with this incredible world you've made, and how will the main narrative drag us through, unwillingly in some cases, different areas so that we can appreciate the lore that you've created. Perhaps most importantly, the characters, the individuals that will act as a foil in order to help us understand some of the deeper conflicts that are happening in this world and some of the more base emotions that humanity has difficulty addressing or speaking through. How you care with those characters, your NPCs, helps you understand the world in that way. And I think finally, the last tentpole is adaptability, how that world changes. Will you be able to, through the narrative experience with your characters, fuck up that lore, change it around, make the world different and new based on the choices that you've made? So those are the 4 pillars that I think, looking back on BioWare games, have at the very least focused on 1 or 2, if not achieved all 4, to really become a tentpole game. Now let's look at how Anthem plans to achieve that resonance with the fans. Let's see if there is that lore, that narrative experience, some great characters, and a chance to change the world with your choices. We're learning today that in the universe of Anthem, Shapers, the quote-unquote gods, created the planet and left. The people then from that point, eons later, survived and adapted. But in our narrative, the tech that these gods use to physically change the world is starting to cause some issues. It's exploding, it's getting in the wrong hands, and the basic rising action is there's a group called Dominion that is very aggressive that's going to use this technology for some dubious means, and a group called the Scars that are going to use the tech as well for, I guess, different dubious means. We are freelancers, we have an apartment, we've never gotten a full-time job, and that basically means we jump into these javelin suits that are divided into 4 different classes and explore the world and try to figure out what's happening. Information we don't have right now, if these different groups like Dominion and Scar, if they're representative of maybe more militaristic things like the Templars versus the Mages, we don't really they're just words that we have so far, and we can conclude what that means based on the words, but we don't know anything more about what they actually represent. This is 3 years, over 3 years, since we've heard the word Anthem in this new IP being spoken about by BioWare. 2012 is when they really started to focus on building this sort of open world experience. If we think about how games like Mass Effect and Dragon Age were introduced to us, how ludicrous would it be if for years the only thing we knew about Mass Effect is that you could use this magic telekinesis that is Mass Effect fields? How weird would it be if all we knew about Dragon Age was that there's mages that had magic? This is what BioWare is focusing on. This is what every trailer focuses on. I don't understand if this really is, because it seems like a seemingly interesting premise, why aren't they pushing that more? Why isn't that the very first trailer instead of canned multiplayer footage that looks exactly like anything that we've seen in Destiny, if not a little more refined? I'm open to the idea that this will be something, that it could be the groundwork for something special, but the fact that it's so ambiguous at this point, when we do know it's coming out in less than a year, when we don't understand who the major players are, we don't have a sense of really what the stakes are. We have a sense narratively because we know what a shaper is, we know what a planet is, but we don't actually understand why we should care that this stuff looks really, really cool. Now, in terms of a narrative experience, I think in the previous games, it adapted and changed, whether we're talking about Dragon Age or Mass Effect, even Andromeda. The gameplay was always meant to service some very classical RPG elements of weapon customization, of gear customization, gear loot, trying to push that kind of narrative forward. But it was always given to you piecemeal in terms of the major conflict. We didn't know who the Reapers were until we had a deep, deep understanding of our role in the universe. We didn't know what was going to happen in the Mage, well, we kind of did, the Mage Templar conflict, even in Dragon Age 2, until we were an established entity. In the Game Informer cover story, developers at BioWare are trying to clear the air about what exactly will happen when a very low-level player is grouped with a higher level, or how this will work since it is still a narrative-based story. The difference will be if I have a greater variety of gear at my disposal. I'm going to be more efficient because I have more things to use than you. But the idea is that it'll feel good. It will feel like we're both contributing. Even if high-level players are doing missions that take place later in the critical path, low-level players will still have the option to join if they don't mind spoilers. Now, can you imagine any other BioWare game that would allow you very early on to see how it ended, to see the last act of the first Mass Effect, to see the last act of the first Dragon Age? They aren't built in a way where we would be able to even understand or appreciate what that story is, because it's so much about understanding the world and finding your place in it. The fact that this co-op mechanic will allow players to play any moment in the story tells me that they're not refined enough, that it doesn't contribute to a greater narrative that you don't understand unless you've taken the time to learn about the world. During E3 and in the Game Informer story, BioWare developers really push the point that the single-player experience will happen on Tarsus, Fort Tarsus, which seems to be the hub area. You only see an effect and deal with other players when you go out into the world, into the group co-op world, and even then, you can only play with up to 4 people. Are we not past the tired gameplay mechanic of World of Warcraft from 2006, where we go to a hub world, get a mission, and then go out into the actual play games world? It really seems like a fundamentally flawed way to develop a story that traditionally BioWare has done very effectively through exploration, through finding new people and new quests and really making you feel like you're traveling through this robust and lived-in world. I don't have confidence that this method that they're saying here plays to BioWare's strengths, and I don't know if it will succeed. One thing that I think BioWare has done maybe the most effectively of any development company in history is creating characters that you not only believe in, but that you root for and that you care about. We are not going to have any followers in Anthem. There are not going to be any sort of romances. There are dialogue trees, but there's a lot simpler. There are a couple of named characters that Mark Dara said were much more like advisors from Dragon Age Inquisition, if you remember. There's Halleck, I'm probably saying this incorrectly, the mechanic who keeps your Strider operational. That's kind of the forward base where you can check out these people without going back to Fort Tarsus. He is a history with the player, and then there's Owen, who is a cipher. That's the name and voice that we heard in the E3 profile. He wants to help out, but he wants to get his own javelin. Pretty trot things that we've heard before. And Faye, who is special, and she's important to the story. If you do opt to play the actual playing part of the game by yourself, you will not have AI players with you. They will not be another javelins to make up your team. You will not have a team of followers. I thought that maybe they were going to adopt something similar to Divinity Original Sin 2, where you picked a character and then all the other characters that you didn't pick became your followers. You lost out on some of the actual narrative experiences that you would hear from your character, but hey, at least I got to experience the game differently. They are going in the completely different direction here. To say that they're making a BioWare game that doesn't have followers, that doesn't have romances, I think misrepresents who the people that play BioWare games are. I think it speaks to a truth that is not of this company, and it's not only about the romances, because I do think those were getting a little overwritten and not as well done, but it does kind of alienate the people that have really appreciated the methodology that went into these characters as foils to understand the world. Patrick Weeks, who famously wrote many of the different characters in both Mass Effect and the Dragon Age franchise, said that it was difficult to make the player care about an issue, but it was a lot easier to make the players care about a specific character. So people like Mordin Solus, like Tali'Zorah, came to represent the greater issues, and it made us be more invested because it wasn't just about saving the planet or changing how the makeup of the universe would be. It's about what my character is doing to that NPC that I care about. The idea that this is happening without that, I'm hoping maybe it's some kind of mistake, but that is one of the strongest fundamentals of what made BioWare games so great, was making characters that you believed in. They kind of were not as effective at making strong narrative ploys, but very, very good at making a squad. And if you think about even some of the successes they've had online with Star Wars: The Old Republic, and the MMO version of that has been successful because of the ancillary characters that went along with it. I don't know what they're going to do here, but it seems like it's a big black eye for anything Anthem has to offer, and that's how this could have been special. And finally, It's how the world changes with you. Speaking to Game Informer, the cataclysms that the Shaper's technology is causing in the world will cause it to shift and change and have new enemies that you affect. In their, I think it was 123 questions portion, Mark Dara answered that yes, you can destroy things, but it won't be lasting. It'll be replicated because this is a living, breathing world. So naturally, when you're going out to do a mission, you kind of lose some of the permanency that you get with these strong single-player stories. Think about what we did in the universe with Mass Effect. Think about what has happened to Ferelden due to our choices. That permanency is something that gives weight to the lore, to the narrative experience, to those characters, because it's now all coming together and giving us choice. I have not heard a single word going through all these different pages about any sort of choice that a player will have, about any sort of narrative duality, that if I take one road, I won't be able to do the other. Why isn't that something that they're pushing? Why are they abandoning everything that seemed to be important and prescient to BioWare as a company previously? We've seen what great single-player experiences like God of War can bring to the gaming community. They can really say something and still be unbelievably fun. BioWare is misunderstanding what we really like about them. We don't want this kind of hackneyed, patched together narrative that extends forever. That's some of the answers they said. You could say, ostensibly play this game forever. I don't want that. I want a really interesting experience that I can play again and again with interesting characters, with interesting choices that maybe give me a little deeper understanding of what it is to be a human being. That is why companies like Arcane Studios, like Obsidian Entertainment, are able to create art that extends past this sort of very binary way of looking at corporate systems. With everything that we've seen today in Anthem, I don't think it will give us the experience that we were looking for, but I am interested deeply to hear what you have to say. It could be that I am just really out to lunch and not understanding what makes BioWare BioWare, but fundamentally, they could have made a game that was still open world, that still had these kind of service elements, but was focused firstly on making a story and a team of characters that worked. If I got a chance to play as Thane in Mass Effect 2, to play as these cool different characters that have very interesting backstories, they would be able to really be something that exceeds the generational levels, like something that we look at that elevates the medium. But instead, it seems like they're just trying to chase after Destiny.